Hello and welcome to Different Perspectives. I am Paul Ndiho. Deposed Gabonese President Ali Bongo has officially left Gabon after more than a year of silence and speculation. Bongo flew out of Libreville and landed in Angola late Thursday, alongside his wife Sylvia and son Noureddin. This marks the first time he's left Gabon since he was ousted in August 2023 coup. Now let's rewind for a second. The Bongos have ruled Gabon for over half a century. First his father Omar Bongo, then his son Ali Bongo, who took over in 2009. The dynasty came crashing down when the military seized power in 2023, accusing the family of looting state resources and dismantling democratic institutions. Ali Bongo was placed under house arrest. Sylvia and Noureddin weren't so lucky. They were thrown into basement cells at the presidential palace and later charged with embezzlement and money laundering. So what does this mean for Gabon? With the Bongo family now in exile in Angola, President Brice Oligui Nguema faces growing expectations from inside and outside the country to lead Gabon into a new era of transparency and freedom. Raphael Makash, welcome to Different Perspectives.
Thank you, Paul.
Former Gabonese President Ali Bongo has fled his country, Gabon, and arrived in Angola. You are in Angola. Bring us up to date.
Ex-President Ali Bongo arrived in Angola. And what is curious about it is that President Lorenzo had criticized the coup in Gabon, and then went to Gabon as head of the African Union for the swearing ceremony of Mr. Nguema, the current president who took over power through a coup. And that gives us two ideas. One, that the doesn't care really about coups anymore, because you have the president, the rotating president of the African Union, going to legitimize a coup leader, while the African Union made all that fuss about the coups in West Africa. So it's this problem we keep dealing with in Africa, the contradictions of our politicians. And then President Lorenzo also launched initially in his first mandate an anti-corruption campaign, which ended up being a campaign to drive out his enemies and consolidate the power of corruption onto himself. And now we have Bongo, who was a very crooked leader from a family line of politicians who just plundered the country, being offered sanctuary in Angola. Who can understand what is Angola's policy towards Africa, towards democracy, towards corruption? No one at this point can understand. But what I can say is that the president needed some international attention after being ignored as the mediator of the DRC conflict, in which the DRC president Tshisekedi went to meet with M23 in Qatar. On the same day, the Angolan government had organized a summit to host them in Angola, and with Kagame supposedly to come to the country as well, and none of them showed up and didn't inform the government. And the government President Lorenzo learned from the news that they were meeting in Qatar on the same day. And now, without that role, which gave him a bit of international legitimacy, he now goes to host a former corrupt leader. That's the legitimacy international opening. He's seen to be on the news for something positive he has done, to rescue Ali Bongo from...
The family of the Bongos were known as very corrupt. one of the charges that was leveled against the current president was trade to Angola was that of corruption. So there are a lot of corruption allegations against him, and he's coming into a country where President Lorenzo, when he was campaigning for office, said he was the candidate who was going to fight corruption. Now here he is bringing arguably one of the most corrupt people in Angola.
The levels of corruption we see today in Angola, is surpassing Dos Santos' wild days of corruption. So we have now the epicenter of corruption in this country is the judiciary now in Angola. So that's why probably President Lorenzo is also passing the idea that he's on the side of such leaders, because maybe when he ends his term, he will also need a country to rescue him and to provide him shelter. One of the biggest criticisms we have in this country is that most of the big contracts in this country worth billions for roads, building dams, construction, for the biggest projects, the president awards them without public tender directly to whoever he sees fit. So in that sense, he's became the very face of corruption in this country at the moment. And everything else he says about being an anti-corrupt leader is basically for a lie.
There are people who would say that in his role as the current chairperson of the African Union, it was his duty really to offer an olive branch to the deposed leader of Gabon, Ali Bongo, to come to Angola.
It's the contradictions. Then why did the African Union and ECOWAS made such a fuss about coups in West Africa? There has, and we don't have that consistency. I know the world is like that. There is no consistency in US policies nowadays, the European Union policies. But if we really want to change the continent and come together, we need some consistency as our own Pan-African relations are concerned.
The African Union to be consistent when it comes to coups. So are you suggesting that they should not have offered asylum to Ali Bongo in Angola? Because
no,
he's
I'm
the
not saying
victim of
that.
the coup. He's the victim of the coup here.
We have to be consistent. He's a victim of a coup, but how did he get the power in the first place? From father to son. Was Gabon, a kingdom?
An independent government, a democratic country. Ali Bongo himself won several elections before he was disposed in 2023.
Yes, but that's why we have to rethink the concept of democracy the way we imported it from the West, because take Equatorial Guinea and many other countries where you have these dictators who consistently hold elections to retain power and deny any freedoms to their own people. Is that democracy because someone has won elections that are rigged? And no public condemnation. Zimbabwe is another example, a case in point. So you have many examples across the continent, and we need to rethink the concept of democracy in the continent. And that's why people are getting fed up with it, because it's not yielding in many parts of the continent results that really translate into benefits for the development of the country, for dialogue, for freedoms. Mozambique is another case. And we saw what happened in Mozambique. Will you call that democracy? No.
Looking at it from a humanitarian point of view, do you think that Angola has done the right move to allow...
Angolans are very welcoming. are very welcoming. And I would extend my welcomes to Ali Bongo as well. Since he's here, we will not, he's welcome. I doubt he will stay here for long. Eventually, he will try to find his way to a country where he can live off his wealth. And Angola is not necessarily a place where he can do that, because every respectable Angolan leader has a house in Portugal or Dubai, and that's where they do their private lives, not here. But I think President Lourenço himself is very inconsistent when it comes to, we don't even know what's Angolan's foreign policy. Where do we stand on African issues, US affairs, European Union affairs? It's all very mercurial. And more importantly, as head of the African Union, we haven't seen an outline on how to tackle the most relevant issues the continent is facing. And again, a president who doesn't care about education in his own country cannot do much, for the continent.
How
That's
about
my
people
point.
who say that's more of a ceremonial role than a policy?
It's still an important role that can be used to champion very relevant causes that can unite Africans for a common goal.
In terms of international relations, this move, of course, I've seen a lot, like you correctly said, there are a lot of critics who think that maybe President Lourenço should not have extended that olive branch to Ali Bongo. But then there are those people who look at it and say, he was part of that club. This was one of their colleagues, maybe. So they don't want to see one of their colleagues going through what Ali Bongo has been going through, at least for the last 1.5 years, while he has been out of power.
If you recall, dos Santos, the former president, Lourenço's predecessor, died in Spain. And once he left power, he spent most of his time in Spain, even though there was an argument of ill health. And President Lourenço did not allow, his son, who was in jail at the time, to go and bid farewell to the father, and treated his own predecessor, the one who chose him for power, very poorly. And so suddenly now he's sympathetic to the plight of another corrupt leader from another country. It doesn't bode well with the Angolan people, because we know what President Lourenço did to his own predecessor. Dos Santos' body came back to Angola as cargo. And for the first night was left in his house with no one around. And he was buried in a place that to this day barely people have authorization to go and visit, because it's basically, it used to be a dumping ground. So it's not a grand gesture on that we can see it as genuine from President Lourenço, because that's, we've come to know him as a very vengeful and bitter man who only cares about himself and the few who care about himself.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Raphael.
Excellent.